Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to our panel, Labor in Palestine, Challenging Complicity and Formulating Strategies for Justice. I need to apologize to our compañeras and compañeros from Brazil. We do not have a translator yet. We were supposed to have a translator. I don't know exactly what. And the compañera Jaime.
Ele não está na empresa agora, porque intervalo. Assim que ele chegar, ele vem aqui.
Pero me vas a cantar.
Ele vem fazer.
Bien. Trabaja en el correo, ¿no?
Trabalha no correio.
Gracias. This compañera from the post office worker is here. Is hoping to get us a translator at the last minute, because we do have representation here from the teachers union of Porto Alegre, and we need to hear and translate them, and those compañeras and compañeras who are assisting who need translation, hopefully we'll be able to do that. But in the meantime, we apologize because we're going to have to conduct it in English until then. This panel is Labor in Palestine, Challenging Complicity and Formulating Strategies for Justice. And basically this panel is representative of people in the labor movement, representing activists who have challenged, who have addressed, and who have tried to present the question of Palestine in a very difficult arena, and that is in the labor field, which of course is unmentioned, and in this specific case of the US, a very difficult battle to bring the question of Palestine workers in particular, to the broad consensus of popular opinion. And we have before us tonight, today's afternoon, representatives from Canada, from Brazil, from Scotland, and from the US. And we also have the representatives from Brazil. So I'm gonna, without further ado, proceed on the panel, and I would like to welcome Illian to open up. Illian Burbano is a representative of Labor for Palestine, Ontario, and also a member of the Canadian Public Workers Union. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, yes.
First of all, I just wanted to thank Jaime and the other organizers for organizing this panel. The role of the labor movement in the Palestine solidarity struggle is very, very important and critical. It has played an important role in Canada, which is what I'm going to mainly speak about. There has been important openings and successes in terms of Palestine solidarity organizing in the labor movement since around 2006. It's important for us that are active in labor to understand that these openings do not occur in a political vacuum. In my own union, in CUPE, in the Canadian Union of Public Employees, which is the largest public sector union in the country, these openings were preceded by years of internal organizing, important education work. The British Columbia wing of my union, CUPE, did some important educational work and published and printed and distributed a book amongst our membership called The Wall Must Fall, and that was important work that was done, as well as motions and resolutions that have been debated in our union since probably around the year 2000, including debates around Palestine that have reached the Canadian Labour of Congress, as well as various provincial conventions of our union, CUPE. Something else that's important to think about is that the organizing that we do inside labor is impacted by its connections to the broader Palestine solidarity movement. In Toronto, in the particular case of Toronto as well as Canada, the broader Palestine solidarity movement has grown steadily in scope, in terms of coordination, over the last several years in direct response to the Palestine 2005 calls for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israeli apartheid. And that has impacted the work that we've done in CUPE as well as in other unions. And I think it's important for us to always remember that maintaining the link in terms of the work that we do in labor around Palestine solidarity, but also maintaining links with community organizations that are active in Palestine solidarity work is an important strategy, and we have to sustain this link in terms of advancing this movement forward and to make it more effective. I'm here as Jaime mentioned, as Labor for Palestine Toronto. We're a cross-union network, and we're a committee of an organization called the Coalition Against Israeli Apartheid, which in Toronto, and it was one of the organizations in Canada that in response to the 2005 BDS Palestinian call began foregrounding an anti-apartheid analysis in terms of Israeli oppression of Palestinians, as well as framing the organizing work in the rubric of a BDS movement. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the work that we did in my union, particularly the provincial Ontario wing of CUPE Ontario. And in 2006, CUPE Ontario, which is the largest public sector union in the province of Ontario in Canada, representing over 200,000 members, we unanimously passed a resolution endorsing the international BDS campaign against Israeli apartheid. Our union was the first international union to answer the BDS call. This decision reverberated internationally, and in Canada, it was probably one of the first times in recent history that a resolution debated at a union convention became a topic of national debate. Our union was subject to a very intense and lengthy campaign, including media campaign aimed at delegitimizing our principal stance in support of the Palestinian people, as well as pressure on our leadership to try to force our union to rescind the decision that we took. Canadian pro-Israeli organizations or Zionist organizations like the Canadian Jewish Congress, B'nai B'rith, as well as representatives of Canada's economic and political elites, again, tried very strongly to pressure our union to step back from the position that we took. Our members suffered intimidation, the staff of our union suffered intimidation, and our leadership was ridiculed and attacked in the public media. In terms of the attacks that were used to delegitimize our support to the BDS movement and for Palestinians, some of the main tactics that were used were that our stance was anti-Semitic, or that we were unfairly singling out Israel for criticism, and again, Israel was put forth as, you know, the only democracy in the Middle East, a vibrant and tolerant society, quote unquote. Another more savvy criticism was that boycotts from wherever they emanate are non-constructive strategies, and they create roadblocks to peace in the Middle East. And that criticism was one that we really had to formulate a response to, because it's a much more subtle and I think a more intelligent critique. Something else that also was used against us was that our union should stick to servicing our members in terms of collective agreement and wages, that we should not be delving into complex international issues in the Middle East, and kind of reinforcing that the role of our movement is business unionism and servicing our members. And CUPE Ontario's stance in support of BDS and in support of the Palestinians directly challenged that model of business unionism, which I think is prevalent in, I think, not only in Canada, but probably in North America and in other parts of Europe. Interestingly, in terms of the criticisms that our union faced, our critics purposely ignored contesting directly or in any substantive way the apartheid analysis and the comparison between Israeli apartheid and South African apartheid. And something else that's really important, and that's important for us to highlight when we do this kind of work, is they always ignored the fact that the call for BDS did not originate from CUPE, that it originated from, you know, over 175 Palestinian civil society organizations and the labor movement. And that sort of racism in terms of invisibilizing the presence and the agency of the Palestinian people is a constant that we need to contest when we do this kind of work. The most important achievement of our union passing this resolution is that we were able to carry out a very comprehensive member-led educational campaign. We printed and distributed about 4,000 bilingual English and French booklets that outline the goals and demands of the BDS campaign. We compared Israeli and South African apartheid, as well as maps detailing the Bantustans in both areas, as well as highlighting the plight of Palestinian workers, lack of freedom of movement, lack of services that Canadian trade unionists take for granted, as well as the high level of unemployment and lack of jobs. This member-led educational campaign is considered one of the most comprehensive in the union's history. And again, it challenged the model of business unionism that is prevalent in a lot of our unions. The Canadian labor movement makes a lot of pronouncements, passes a lot of resolutions on many, many issues, local, national, and international, but it's more the exception than the practice that there's actually a viable implementation of these resolutions. So the work that QP Ontario did around this struggle was very important. In terms of this work not happening in a vacuum, shortly after QP Ontario passed its resolution, it opened things up internationally. In other unions, for example, we passed our resolution in May 2006. In August 2006, the CUT here in Brazil passed a similar BDS resolution, or a BDS resolution. The Congress of South African Trade Unions did so as well. In August of 2006, a couple of months later, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions in July 2007. And then in Canada in 2008, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, my brother Mike Palacek is a representative here from CUPW. They became the first national union in Canada to pass a pro-BDS resolution. And since then, there have been political openings in different pockets of the Canadian labor movement. The Vancouver and District Labor Council passed a similar resolution in June 2010, as well as a confederation of municipal unions in the city of Montreal, representing over 80,000 workers, the CCMM-CSN. They passed a similar resolution in May 2010. And there have been other openings in the Canadian labor movement. The challenges, even though we've had these openings, important openings since 2006 in the Canadian labor context, the challenges that we're facing in Canada particularly is that Canada, especially among its corporate elite, its political elite, has very deep historical roots, and there's a staunch ideological support for the Israeli state and its colonization project over Palestine. To go back in history, Lester Pearson, a renowned Canadian politician, chaired the committee that established the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, UNSNOP, and he and other Canadians played a key role in moving forward the 1947 partition of Palestine. Canada, despite the myth of it being a peacekeeper since the 50s and 60s, the Canadian government of all political stripes has sided consistently with Israel in any deliberations in international forums and the United Nations. In 1997, the Canadian state signed its first free trade agreement outside the Western Hemisphere with Israel. In 2004, not under the current government, the previous Liberal government, Canada abstained on the General Assembly resolution calling for Israel to abide by the International Court of Justice ruling on the illegality of the apartheid wall in the West Bank. Canada, under the current government, the Harper Conservative government, was the first country in the world to cut aid to the Palestinian Authority after the 2006 election victory of Hamas. And support for Israel for its colonization project of Palestine has solidified and strengthened under the current conservative government of Stephen Harper. So as you can understand, doing Palestine organizing work is difficult in this political and social context that we're in. Some of the challenges, particularly in labor movement, what we learned in our experience in QP Ontario is that the ideological support for Israel and its colonization project of Palestine is not widespread among rank and file and leadership of the union. For example, when we passed our resolution in May 2006, the broader labor movement mainly remained silent. There was one labor leader, the former president of the Canadian Auto Workers, Buzz Hargrove, who wrote an op-ed piece in a national newspaper criticizing our stance. But generally, the broader labor movement kind of stayed silent. They didn't criticize us, they didn't support us at that time. The barrier in the labor movement, more than ideological support or staunch ideological support for Zionism amongst the rank and file, is lack of education. And then there's also a fear, particularly amongst the leadership, that if you address this issue within the union structures, you will be subject to intense pressure and an intense campaign like other unions have. The policy of the Canadian labor movement broadly, on paper, is fairly decent. It's not a BDS position, but it's decent. It's the end of the occupation, dismantle the wall, support a peace process, but there's no strategy for action or implementation. And the threat of BDS resolutions is not so much in the content, but more in the fact that they're prescribing that the labor movement take some action and examine its own investments, its own interest in Israeli apartheid, and challenge that complicity and move forward. So the challenge of BDS motions that have been passed is more that it prescribes that the labor movement has to take action, move forward, educate its members, and not just make a pronouncement on paper. Just to end, as Labor for Palestine, we've also been working in a kind of a broader network. In the past recent months, we've been meeting as union activists, QP, CUPW, and other activists, as well as activists in the broader Palestine solidarity movement. And what we're trying to do is to develop a national network. We're not huge, but we're a link nationally where we can improve our coordination in terms of the education work that we do, as well as try to see if we can develop some kind of coordinated divestment campaign, which has not happened in the Canadian labor movement. And we're also interested in organizing a representative, as much as possible, union delegation from Anglophone Canada as well as Quebec to Palestine sometime in 2013. And I guess the final lesson is that it's important for us as labor activists to work within our union structures, doing internal education, advocating to push forward resolutions and implementing those resolutions. But it's also important for us to be active across union structures and outside union structures in the community, in alliance with community organizations. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Illian. I think Illian has opened quite a few aspects that I think all of us are going to address in our experiences, difficulties. You can't hear me? Oh, is that working? Okay.
That's not the PA mic, that's just a recording.
This is just a recording thing. Okay, I'll use my voice, which will carry. As I said, Illian has given us a good opening in terms of the discussion, raising many of the very same issues that I'm sure all of our panelists have experienced and have had to react to and overcome in addressing the question of Palestine, and specifically the question of Palestine labor. And before I go on, I also wanted to introduce myself. My name is Jaime Veve. I'm chairing this panel on behalf of the U.S.-Canada Joint Delegation, which has organized this panel, including a number of other panels. I just recently retired as an official trade unionist, working 35 years, and 28 of them in the New York City Transit subway system as an organizer, chairman, and other division titles. And I would like to introduce Mike Arnott, compañero from Scotland. He is with the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign delegation. And Mike is also secretary of the Dundee Trades Union Council and representing trade councils on the Scottish Trade Union Council, General Council, and I'll let him speak more about the work that they have done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaime. The Scottish Trade Union movement's activism on the issue of Palestine can be traced back to the University of Dundee in the late 1970s. A number of communist Iraqi and Kurdish students in the university were being harassed by Ba'athist students who were sent there to spy on them and to intimidate them. Now, the Labour and Communist students in the university were able to assist them and able to minimise and eventually eradicate the intimidation, have to admit it, by using a bit of intimidation of their own on the Ba'athist representatives. Well, the question was then asked of the Iraqi and Kurdish leftist students, what can we do for you? And their response was, don't do anything for us, do something for the Palestinians. Contact was then made with Palestinian students on the campus, over 100 Palestinian students at the University of Dundee at that time. And the issue and the cause of Palestine and the Palestinian people was then taken up by the trade union and labour movement in the city of Dundee. In 1980, a motion calling for the recognition of Palestine's right to self-determination was tabled by Dundee TUC at the Scottish TUC Congress. And in the following year, the Labour-controlled city of Dundee twinned with the city of Nablus and flew the Palestinian flag from the city chambers, and it still flies in the city square to this day. The first official STUC delegation went to Palestine in 2001 during the Second Intifada as guests of the PGFTU. And in the last 5 years, activity has increased with the call for support for BDS and the criticism of the role of the Histrodute, leading to the STUC sending a major delegation to Palestine in 2009, including the General Secretary and representatives of all the major unions. The delegation's report was presented to the following Congress, where a motion on BDS was unanimously passed, and the STUC went on to publish this information pack, an education pack, a guide to activists, and a guide to other affiliated trade unions on taking forward BDS within Scotland and within the trade union and labour movement. Attempts to get the STUC to officially withdraw recognition from the Histrodute have not been successful, partly due to the lack of a clear call from the PGFTU leadership for derecognition to take place. But pressure on Histrodute continues, and the STUC General Council has agreed to keep its relationship with the Histrodute under review. With the assistance of the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign, 4 trade union organisations submitted 4 motions on Palestine to the 2012 Scottish TUC Congress, which was held last April, and all 4 were unanimously passed. They were against the Jewish National Fund and for its charitable status to be withdrawn, supporting those who participated in the Welcome to Palestine 2012 initiative and calling for an end to the siege of Palestine, endorsing the World Social Forum Free Palestine, supporting the Palestinian hunger strikers and calling for an end to administrative detention, and recognising the solidarity work of the Scottish Fire Brigade Union with Palestine. And this is another important example of solidarity. The Scottish Fire Brigade Union's work includes sending firefighting equipment to Gaza after Operation Cast Lead, organising in 2009 8 firefighters from Nablus to come and train for 4 weeks at the Scottish Fire Service Training College and also at Fire Brigade Training Facility in Manchester. And the Tayside Fire Brigade Union recently sent 2 fire engines and firefighting equipment to Nablus. Much needs to be done and policies can be passed, although we know that policies in themselves, they can send an important message and a powerful message both to the Palestinian people and to those opposed to the liberation of those in Palestine. But they must also result in concrete action. But solidarity, the links between workers in Palestine and the rest of the world can be developed between similar union branches, between workplaces and industries. And we're here today to share our own experiences and learn from others, and to help mobilize the forces of organized labor in solidarity with the Palestinian workers, their families and communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Our next speaker will be Suzanne Adely. Suzanne Adely is the representing Labor for Palestine in New York, a grouping of New York trade unionists who are active in addressing the issue of Palestine within AFL-CIO and the New York City Labor Council. She is also a member of the Middle East North Africa Labor Solidarity Committee, and also on the International Committee of the National Lawyers Guild, and also a member of Al-Auda, the Right to Return campaign. And so, with no further ado, Suzanne.
I'll also add that I currently work for a large, okay, louder? Okay.
Yeah, that's
I'll also add that I work for a large U.S. union called the United Auto Workers, which I'm obviously not representing today. And what I do for them, I have been doing for them, is facilitating partnerships and projects with other auto workers in other countries, mainly in India. I've also done some work in the Middle East for them. I'll sort of touch a little bit on that, how sort of perspective that I've sort of been seeing from doing that kind of work in terms of our ability to continue this sort of BDS movement and the labor movement towards the end. So I'm a member of Labor for Palestine, which was created in 2004 in New York. And it was created through the efforts of 2 organizations. One, which was the New York City Labor Against the War, which was started after 9/11, September 2001. And Al-Auda, which is the Palestine Rights Return Coalition New York chapter, which I've been a part of since 2000 when it was founded. And the work of the Labor for Palestine, a lot of it is educational, a lot of it is putting out statements in support of labor movement in Palestine, but it's sort of mainly about bringing boycott and divestment to the labor movement in the U.S. And it promotes sort of a complete cutting off of relationships with Histadrut, and it promotes also the idea of the full decolonization of Palestine, supporting all rights, including the right of return, and sort of recognizing also that people have the right to return to the land that was taken in 1948, etc., etc. And Labor for Palestine was one initiative of many that started sort of in response to what I would say is, in a lot of ways, an extreme relationship between the U.S. labor movement and the Zionist project and the state of Israel. Labor officialdom, or let's say large labor institutions in the U.S. have had a very strong relationship with Israel. They've been one of the staunchest defenders of Israel and the Zionist project since the early days of labor. And that relationship was facilitated very much by Histadrut, which, especially at the time that it began its relationship with the labor movement in the early part of the 20th century, was really not functioning as a trade union. It was functioning as a state-building project for Israel. Ben-Gurion was the first chairman of Histadrut, and he himself said that the state of Israel would not have been possible without Histadrut, or building the state of Israel would not have been possible without Histadrut. They also founded Irgun, which was Israeli terrorist organization, early one, and Histadrut also led to the founding of the first Israeli armed forces. And so Ben Gurion is one example of the dominance of labor Zionism or left Zionism that was part of the early sort of colonization project of Israel, and continued to have both dominance or participation in what would be subsequent war crimes by Israel and the realization of the Zionist project and the colonization of Palestine. And it's that left face of Zionism that has appealed to the labor movement in the United States, and not just to the labor movement in the United States, has appealed to liberal sort of leaning political movements in the U.S. And other sort of social justice movements in the U.S. Really for decades and decades. And it's only in the past couple of decades that the grassroots Palestinian movements or Palestinian solidarity movements have really been able to sort of break through that and show how this left face of Zionism, that is associated with labor or other so-called issues of social justice, is actually just sort of another face of colonization, of racism, of imperialism, etc. And also sort of showing this strong bond between the Zionist colonization of Palestine and the support that they received from the U.S. labor movement is the fact that the U.S. labor movement has, through the years, and continues to invest billions of dollars in Israeli bonds. And it's that investment that helped sort of the state-building project of Israel that resulted in all these years of the colonization of Palestine. And today, we are starting to sort of see progress, as I was saying, and sort of breaking through that relationship and sort of exposing the oppression of the Israeli state to people in the labor movement. And people are sort of starting to question the strong support that these labor institutions have had with Israel, not just through the investments, but also the special relationship that many of very well-known famous labor leaders have had with the state of Israel particularly, and the leaders of the Israeli state. Something you don't see them doing with other countries, with other states of the world. Okay. And so we find ourselves in a situation now where the challenge of continuing the movement of BDS and labor is not just sort of this past relationship between U.S. labor and Zionism, but also sort of current circumstances that are beginning to take place. We have now an entity referred to as TULIP, which stands for Trade Unions Linking Israel and Palestine, which is a new initiative started by one of the leaders of a large retail workers union in the U.S., Barry Applebaum. Stuart Applebaum, sorry. And their mission basically is to counter the movement, the BDS movement that you start to see arising in the labor movement in the U.S. and globally. And so the Labor for Palestine work has been starting to get more support in different areas of the country and in different sort of aspects of the labor movement in the U.S. And as far as successes, There was one large success that occurred in 2010, which we actually in New York were not a part of. It took place actually in the west coast of the United States in Oakland, when the dock workers, the ILWU, working with Palestine solidarity activists in the area, organized an excellent action where the workers refused to handle Israeli goods that were sort of coming in at the port. Now, the ability to do that is not just because of the great work of Palestine solidarity activists in the Bay Area. It was also because the ILWU itself was a union that had very good politics in regards to race, in regards to imperialism. They actually have a very large black membership, and in the past have stood up also against apartheid South Africa and in other issues dealing with race and white supremacy. When talking about going forward, one of the periods in history that we like to look to was a very significant moment in labor history that many people don't know about, which was in 1973, when thousands of Arab auto workers went on strike in Detroit in opposition to their union, the UAW, the one that I work for, in opposition to their investment in Israeli bonds. Also organized themselves in opposition to one of the UAW leaders receiving an award from B'nai B'rith, and also in opposition to one of the locals who had also been investing in Israel. And that was made possible because of relationships that the Arab workers had started to build with black workers in Detroit, who had organized themselves under the auspices of organizations like the Dodge Revolutionary Union Movement and the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, not just in the Dodge plants, but in many of the plants. And that was sort of a labor movement that recognized that the leadership of large unions like the UAW not only were neglecting the needs of black and Arab workers in the plants, and in some cases had been openly hostile to the non-white workers who were in the plants, but realizing that they were also complicit in these larger questions of colonialism and imperialism. And so that was a very sort of significant period. I have to end soon, so I wanted to say that, well, that period in 1973 was a very important one, but in many ways the dynamics had changed. Labor is still very much entrenched with Israel, and added to that is we're starting to see these large labor institutions like the AFL-CIO, Teamsters, and my own union starting to institutionalize their international work, which in some ways also sort of reflects the political, like for example the Solidarity Center, which is not a union, but is sort of the international arm of the AFL-CIO and has been funded by the State Department, has been funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. You start to see them starting to build global projects in different countries. And you start to see their actions reflect the politics of the United States. And so this is another area in which these politics will start to be sort of entrenched in the larger labor movement. And one of the groups that Solidarity Center actually works with, and I'm going to end on this, I really need to mention this, is Labour Star. And I know that they originated in the UK, but I actually have to work a lot with them through my job. And I don't know how many people know that Labour Start is basically an online sort of activist organization to support labor movements around the world. Well, their leadership is Zionist, and they work very closely now with Arab unions, many of whom I don't think are aware of the political past of their leadership. They work with unions like mine, and they work, to support unions who I'm working with in India. And when having these discussions with people, I get many different responses. Some I won't get into, but one in particular, for example, when I'm talking to auto workers, for example, in India's largest auto plant Maruti Suzuki, where they presently have 150 of their leaders in prison, Labor Start was able to organize tens of thousands of signatures to the state of Haryana and to the company to support them. And as militant as the politics of the Indian workers are, when I say to them, that I have a problem with the Zionist politics of Labor Start, their response is that we understand that, but our success could affect the success of millions of workers in India, and Labor Start is doing X for us. And it's not so much of like, well, what are you doing for us? They're doing this for us. It's so much more of a point to say that in order to really realize the aspirations of a labor movement that is cutting itself off from the colonialist, sort of settler, racist ideologies of Israel, we need a strong labor movement in the United States, and we need a strong global labor movement that's sort of recognizing that the needs of these workers are there, and if we're not building that movement, then you have these international arms like Solidarity Center and these international organizations like Labor Start sort of filling that vacuum. And I'll end to say that yes, we need a strong labor movement in the U.S. in order to fulfill the aspirations of labor BDS. And maybe we're starting to see that as you see the Chicago Teachers Union strike, which was enormous and successful. It made me very happy. And Wisconsin. But in the irony here is that Wisconsin would not have happened without OWS and Occupy Wall Street. And well, that's arguable, but it's a momentum really was there because Occupy had occurred right before it. And Occupy really would not have had the momentum it had if it wasn't for the Arab revolutions. And the Arab revolutions would not have ever really built if it wasn't for the Palestinian Intifada. So it always comes back to Palestine at the center.
Thank you. Susan. And Susan was referring to the Longshoremen Workers Union of San Francisco, Oakland. And that action was part and parcel of a number of actions around the world in stopping Israeli ships from unloading in respective countries. South Africa is one, Ireland is another one, and I'm probably forgetting other countries. And this is part and parcel of the struggle to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. And another point quickly, the U.S. official labor movement, the dominant labor movement, became a strong supporter of Israel at the very moment that it destroyed the left wing of the labor movement in the U.S. back in 1947-48. And it's been downhill ever since. The U.S. working class, which funds and whose money is used to finance the support for Israel by the official state government, also U.S. workers are contributing $5 billion investments in Israeli bonds. $5 billion without their knowledge, without their input, without debate, without question. And I fought this for 20 years in my union, and it was always the unmentionable issue, the holy grail that you could not address. I want to call upon, before I call upon the brother from Canada, Mike, I want to make an announcement. We may not be able to have enough time to have a full discussion of strategy, tactics, and lessons, but we are going to have a meeting of labor activists tomorrow night, Friday night at 8:30 p.m. And this will be after the large labor meeting panel number 97, which is from 6:30 to 8 p.m. tomorrow night. And we want to meet at the Asamblea Legislative Assembly. We want to meet there, and there we will be able to have a more on-hand discussion and interchange and exchange regarding how we proceed from here, what ideas we may have in terms of moving forward a very challenging issue and a very difficult battle that we need to proceed in expanding the boycott, divestment, sanction within labor. I want to call upon Mike Palacek. He is a national representative of the Canadian Postal Workers Union, of which there are a number of participants with him today. He is also the head of the international work for the Canadian Workers Union, and also an activist in addressing the question of Palestine within the Canadian Labor Federation. And I'd like to introduce Mike.
Hi, thanks. So I think Illian did a really great job introducing sort of the overall political context and some of the challenges you face in bringing forward BDS resolutions and getting this work done through the labor movement. So I think I'm going to talk a little bit about how exactly this can be done, and what strategies are effective, and how to actually conduct the solidarity work. I think to start with, we need to recognize that it's a controversial issue, and actually taking a stand on this issue often has repercussions. You get pushback. Illian talked about the harassment of their activists, the intimidation, and so on. We faced the exact same thing when we passed a resolution in support of BDS. Our office windows were smashed one day. Still, not a week goes by, years later, where we don't get letters protesting the stance we've taken in support of Palestine. And so it's a controversial issue that I think we need to be on the right side of. But if you look at some of the more bureaucratic elements within the labor movement, how do they deal with controversy? I bet it's the same everywhere as it is in Canada. Turn away. They try not to address it. They don't want to have to deal with it. And so you'll run into this problem if you try and bring BDS resolutions to labor federations, into trade unions. Quite often, everybody will support it, but they'll make sure it never sees the floor. They'll tie it up in policy committees and resolutions committees. They'll find bureaucratic ways of preventing it from actually being debated without opposing it publicly. So how do you counter that? I think the only way to do it successfully is to build a movement from the rank and file, to educate the rank and file members to the point where they'll demand that a resolution be heard on the floor, so that it's not just a handful of activists, but the overall floor of a convention demands that a resolution be addressed. That's when you will see things move. And so you have to start with basic education on the issue. And again, I think Illian mentioned the document that Commitee put out, The Wall Must Fall, which was very widely distributed, not just in Commitee, but throughout the Canadian labour movement. That had a huge effect on rank and file workers, because there was pushback against it. There was even in the media was attacking Commitee for putting out this document. Well, if you're average trade union worker, here's the media attacking a union for putting out this shameful document. The first thing they're going to say is, oh, I want to read that. And so this document was quite widely read, and it helped build support and build the momentum, and that's the first thing that you have to do. Once you actually get a BDS resolution passed, you have momentum in terms of building support for Palestine within your organization. Well, how do you actually translate that into meaningful solidarity work? Because there's another tendency the labor movement has, which is to pass a resolution and then forget about it. Well, that doesn't help anyone in Palestine. It doesn't help build solidarity. It doesn't help mobilize the members. So you have to pass the resolutions, sure, but then you have to carry out the work that follows from it. And for our union, one of the things that meant for us, what was really important, is that we build direct links with trade unionists on the ground in Palestine. And so that was one of the first things that we did. We made contact with a union called the Postal union. They do some work in postal services delivering, so we found a connection that was relevant for us there, although they mostly do telecommunications. And so we asked them, we said, what do you need from us? How can we support you? And they said they really needed help educating their members, educating their activists, and so on, but they didn't have the resources to do it. And so we developed an education program with the Paltel Union, which we're financing for them. And it's not that we've just cut them a check and handed them money and said, here. But we worked with them to build this program where they can educate their shop stewards on the basics of trade unionism and how to mobilize their members. And again, it wasn't us coming in and saying, this is what to teach your members. But we helped facilitate the program where they developed their own material to help develop their union. So that was one thing that we did right away. And since then, we've done more work to sort of bring lessons back home to our members. So recently we organized a speaking tour of a couple of the leading members of that union from Paltel. We brought them from Palestine to Canada, and as well as 2 members from the Moroccan Postal Workers Union, who we also have good ties with. And we brought them around to speak with our members, and over the course of 2 weeks, they managed to interact with hundreds and hundreds of postal workers in Canada at all levels of the union. They not only met with our National Executive Board and attended regional presidents' meetings of local presidents, but we took them directly onto the shop floor and a lot of our biggest facilities, where they were able to meet with rank and file workers on the shop floor, where we could explain, you know, the situation that they were facing at home. So it's about building links from the bottom all the way up. And I think an important component of this is finding ways to cross-pollinate the work that your union is already doing. For example, one of the things that my union does really well is we have a fantastic education program. And we made sure that this tour aligned with a week-long educational that was happening in Port Elgin. And this week-long educational was about the issue of globalization. And so we brought these people to this education where we had about 60 of our members from all across the country together for a week. And we made this a component of that educational work. And so in this way, doing solidarity work with Palestine is not just an isolated issue that CUPW takes on, but we try and bring it in to the rest of the work of our union. We cross-pollinate into all of the different work that we're doing. And I think that's the approach that we need to be taking in a broader sense as well. When you look at, say, for example, the BDS campaign. I think there are a lot of avenues where the BDS campaign can do the exact same sort of thing, where we could benefit not just from a boycott campaign of Israel, but also the corporations that are profiting from apartheid in Israel.
Okay, and to conclude this panel, and I'm not sure we'll have any time left for questions or comments. I would like to call on Brother Mick Napier. I said Mike before, but that's my mistake. Who is representing, again, the Boycott Israel Network United UK delegation. Mick is chair of the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Committee and a member of the organizing committee of Stop the Jewish National Fund campaign. Brother Mick Napier, thank you.
I'd just like to pick up on some of the remarks by the Canadian comrades. He alluded to Veolia, and I just want to try to end on a qualified optimistic note, because the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign is registering all sorts of successes. By the way, it's always nice to bring good news. Does everybody know that Stevie Wonder has just cancelled his performance in Israel? An example.
Los Angeles.
Many years ago, I went to Palestine and carried news of a European poll conducted it was very well funded by the EU, 15 countries at that time, and they asked people what they thought about this whole list of countries. You could list America, Britain, North Korea, Iran, blah, blah, blah. Israel was there. Which country do you think is the greatest threat to world peace? 59% of Europeans from Lithuania to Dublin chose Israel. And the response of the Israeli government was to say, well, Europe's awash with anti-Semitism, blah, blah, blah. Yeah? Now, I think that the basic soil, the basic public opinion that we work with is extremely sympathetic to what we have to say. Yes. And that many doors are there to be pushed open. I don't think that it's a controversial subject in most of Europe. It's much harder to fight on this issue in places like Canada and the USA, but I think that doors are open, trade union doors are open wherever you go in Britain and many, many parts of Europe. And the figures, the hostility towards Israel has obviously increased with Operation Cast Lead and with the latest massacre. And when you look at the trade union rank and file members, that figure of sympathy for Palestine and general hostility and suspicion towards Israel is much, much higher. I think it's really important for all Palestine solidarity groups of any sort to see trade unions as their best ally, and to see that trade unions do a fantastic job for us, if I can put it that way as a trade unionist. Trade unions, when they organise a demonstration, concentrate those people in the community who give their free time, who have a broader vision of things, who are prepared to sacrifice their time by going to boring meetings to better the conditions of their brothers and sisters. And it's our natural constituency, and I do suggest that Palestine solidarity groups should never miss a workers' demonstration without leafleting it and trying to broaden the interest and the concerns there. You're really knocking at an open door. The most recent one in Scotland that we distributed thousands and thousands of leaflets at was just people grabbing them out of your hand. Give me 5, give me more. Not give me 5 like that, but give me 5 leaflets that I can take away and distribute. It was really, really, it was like you're really among friends. And when you compare that with, I mean, I mentioned some good news about Stevie Wonder, but when you compare that with the position of our government, I mean, I actually have a Canadian passport. You know, I'm not proud of it. I just got one ages ago. Got a British passport and a Canadian passport. A real double whammy, yeah? What the hell do you need after that? A Syrian passport, probably, right? To get really dirty. Look, Gordon Brown, our past Chancellor, he goes to Palestine and he comes back and he says, he's not very original, he says it's the economy stupid, yeah? And he calls for investment in Palestine. Don't talk about the wall, don't talk about all the horror that everybody here is familiar with. We need investment. What does he mean? He means that, I forget the name of the city, I've been there several times, up in the northwest of the West Bank. There's one tunnel that goes into this city, right? Israeli-controlled tunnel that goes under a road. Gordon Brown wants a servile labour force completely surrounded by Israeli checkpoints, coming in and out of their town through a bloody tunnel to go to some sweatshop. That's the investment. And then at the end of the day to go back through Israeli checkpoints, a servile labour force. And obviously British workers, other workers, trade unionists can be organised to oppose that. And today, the complicity of our governments, of my own government, you could probably go into a competition here with Canada and the USA to say that it's even worse there. But you know, Britain's, you know the joke about the good news and the bad news? There is no good news for the British government, but they are supporting the Palestinian appeal to join the United Nations on a sort of apprentice level. There's only 3 conditions. The first condition is you must promise Palestine, you must promise Abu Mazen, not to take Israel to the International Criminal Court. Now that's sending a very loud signal. If you ask me to promise not to take him to court for theft and burglary, the obvious question is, why are you asking me to promise? He must have done it. There must be, but the British government is saying to the Palestinians, you must promise not to take Israel to the International Criminal Court. You must also promise to go back to the peace process without preconditions. The settlement's built, but you continue talking to Netanyahu. The complicity is deeper and more naked and more obvious, and rank and file trade unionists are open to the arguments that we have to make. But there's a problem. My own union, the Educational Institute of Scotland, is an educational union. We voted, I moved one motion one year, we voted virtually unanimously for boycott. I mean, really, I think it was 500 to 3 or something like this. Nothing ever happens. And those of us who try to organise boycott activities on the basis of emotion come up against all sorts of objections. It was alluded to by comrades earlier. But I just end on this. That You mentioned Veolia. Veolia lost €3 billion contract in Stockholm, 700 million in Melbourne, I believe, and we also got them knocked off the list in Edinburgh and a few. They seem to be losing bids all over Britain for sure, and way beyond. But Palestine solidarity groups have to learn how to work with trade unions. Because when some of us made a presentation to Edinburgh City Council to bump Veolia off the list of bidders because of their crimes in the West Bank, we have to work, and we're happy to work with the main union there, Unison. But Unison, as somebody alluded to, unions fighting against privatisation. Unison's fighting to keep the jobs in the public sector. So we have to work out something. We have to negotiate with the union. We cannot simply say, bump Veolia and give it to any other private contractor that you want. We have to develop an alliance with the union to say we want it kept in the public sector. And we have to learn how to develop partnership like that. When we did that, I'll just end with what we thought was a funny story at the time, but it's a really lovely story. We're doing a demonstration one day, we're marching back with flags flying after an unconnected issue, and the bin men lean out of a lorry and shout in the main street in Edinburgh, "Death to Zionism." Now, we're not used to that level of political education among the street cleaners, but what it was, they understood, their Unison members, and there was an element of irony, but they understood very well that our campaign in support and solidarity with people of Palestine, and their campaign to keep the emptying of the bins in the public sector, that we had a commonality. So I would say one thing, Israel is dirtier and dirtier in public opinion with every year and every massacre that passes. The great majority of the public are sympathetic to us or neutral. Trade unionists, it's even better. I don't want to underestimate the problems of organising in trade unions and bureaucratic ability to stymie initiative, but I think the future's with us. Thanks very much, comrades.
I want to thank Mick for really ending it with a very strong focus and argument. I want to thank all the panelists, thank Casati and Compañero for translating. Really, you saved us because we did not have an official translator. So really we appreciate your attendance. We apologize again for not being able to open up for a fuller discussion. But I would like to remind you that tomorrow night we will have a more intense discussion and sharing experiences as presented by Mick, presented by Mike, by others here, and also your own input on how we can expand this work. That's tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. after the large labor panel number 97, which is from 6:30 to 8 p.m. and we will meet at the Legislative Assembly. Also now at 2 o'clock there is a panel workshop on the academic boycott of Israel. And that is now 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. at the Sindicato dos Bancarios Auditorium. And that is at Rua General Cámara 424. It should be on the program.
Yes.
Okay, so again, we'd like to welcome you to that. Welcome you to the meeting tomorrow night. And onward to a successful World Social Forum. Free Palestine. Thank you, everyone.